Otto Sonnenholzner will be proceeding with stories of a global journey, our alumni testimonials of their extraordinary paths. Thank you.
Thank you. Do we have sound? Yes, okay. Thank you, everyone. It's great to be back at Schiller after 20 years now. Thank you for inviting me and my wife, Claudia. It's a pleasure to see how the university grows. It's a pleasure to see how the alumni comes together again. And it was a particular pleasure to listen to Mariano and Johan, so an applause to them. It was a great... I prepared this very interesting speech, but I cannot start without talking a bit about what they were talking about, because they were talking about change. And the only thing we really know about change is that it is constant, as Heraclitus said. And that if you want to make some enemies, try to change something. That's what President Wilson used to say. But we live in an era of change, and change is always faster. As we evolve our technologies and we're able to process information at higher speeds, change becomes faster. And the change we're facing now with artificial intelligence, with social media, is one of the greatest challenges we're facing as humanity. And you know, as a former vice president of Ecuador, you have to deal with change personally, and you have to lead through change. And the experiences I have had in that matter show me that it is becoming harder to lead through change, that it is becoming more dangerous than it was. And it doesn't mean that change is bad. It means that it can become dangerous, and you have to be aware. Why? And let's take, for example, and I want to connect the prior presentation with my experiences. We live in an era where you need no intermediation to communicate. My first professional experience was in broadcasting. Only 20 years ago, you needed to go to a radio station, to a newspaper, to a TV station, to communicate with the rest of the world. As an authority, you had the power. Okay, if you want. We can turn this off. Now, there we go. As an authority, you had the power to decide and control what people would listen to, right? That's a huge power. You don't have that anymore. That power, as any power, can be used for good or for bad. When a global pandemic hit, only 4 years ago, Madrid, Wuhan, New York, and Guayaquil, my home city, were the cities the hardest hit by the pandemic. How would I have loved to control communication? How much would I have loved to be able to be the only channel to talk to people? Because we needed them to embrace a change that was coming, that was an adaptive change. It was not a technical fix. We couldn't solve COVID with a technical solution. There was no vaccine. There was no medicine to treat the ill. We needed them to adapt, to change the way they live. And we needed to explain to them why it was important. And as you were telling them why they had to stay home and wash their hands and use a mask, they were also receiving information telling them that it was just a flu, or that if they drink Clorox, they'll be safe. No, this is true stories. We tend to forget. So this is when the word regulation comes in, what Johan and Mariano were talking about. As a politician, it's tough to talk about regulation, especially when it's about things that you believe are your rights. The right to have free access to the internet. My public career started as an advocate for freedom of speech against authoritarian governments. And that's how people know me in Ecuador, fighting against authoritarian regimes to preserve rights. But rights have to come with responsibilities. And the only way to set responsibilities is through regulation.
But I said, as a politician, it's hard to talk about it because normally, traditionally, historically, good policy is bad politics. And you have elections every 4 years. And you don't want to be the guy who restricts. You don't want to be the dad, you know, and the mom telling you what not to do. You want to be the guy to tell people that everything is possible and that you can do whatever you want. Because that's popular, but it's not viable. So it's tough grounds, politics today. You have to compete against people with no limits, with no moral values. And social media, as Mariano and Johan said, are boosting those speeches. And then rationality is losing the battle against the radical, right? And radicalization feels good because it makes you feel part of a group. It makes you feel part of something special. But in the end, it's dangerous, it's risky. And change, radical change, it's part of most political speeches today. And nobody stops and thinks the dangers that brings. The dangers that brings. And rational politicians, you know, center politicians, they just lost everywhere in Europe. They're losing everywhere all around the world. They're finding no space to do things how they're supposed to be done. Because the lack of regulation in communication and this amazing power that we all have now hides those people, hides the normal thinking people. They're not interesting, they're boring, but necessary. What a challenge. What a challenge. And let me go back to COVID and leading through dangerous times. I always say, change is dangerous, right? It's not bad, but it's dangerous. When you face change, when you lead change, you're putting yourself out there. You're taking responsibility, especially as a leader. I remember trying to fight back all these fake news that were making it so difficult to control the situation in Ecuador. There was, people were already dying here in Spain, in Wuhan, and some people still believed it was nothing. And you go out there and you think that because you're an authority, people will listen to you. And that's when you realize that one thing is to be an authority and a very, very different thing is to be a leader. It's just two different things, and you tend to get confused. When you get your appointment, you know, as an authority, you think you're a leader. No, you're not. You're just a guy who is appointed to do something and has some authority, that's it, but you're not a leader. So the challenge is to lead through hard times. And to lead, you have to connect. And to connect, you have to be honest. You have to speak from the heart. You have to tell the truth, as hard as it might be, as unpopular as it might be. And then people will feel that they need to listen to you. And you know, when I realized this is March 19th, my birthday. I was turning 37. Vice president of a nation. The president was isolated because he had health issues. I was in charge. And we got news from my city, Guayaquil, I was in Quito, that the pandemic was breaking loose out there. Death rates were, you know, going up at very high speeds. And I was at the control center, and I get news that the hospitals had an absence rate from the healthcare personnel of about 50%. That means half of the health workers were not going to work. Why? Because they were afraid, of course. So I went on national television, I gave a speech. I was basically mad, telling them what to do. I gave them an order because I was the vice president who was in charge, and I told them you have to go back to work. Who went back to work? No one. Because I was behaving like an authority, not like a leader. The next morning, already 37 years old, I decided to go to Guayaquil against all advice. Against all advice, because everyone was saying it was too dangerous that I go. And I didn't only go to Guayaquil. I went to all hospitals, intensive care units, morgues and cemeteries. We were having 600 deaths per day. And not even the people in the cemeteries wanted to work. They were afraid of touching the bodies. So what do you do? If you want to ask someone to do something that might be dangerous, you have to show them that you're also willing to do it yourself. What we know as leading by example. And you start doing what no one else wanted to do. And you start moving forward, and you start solving the problem. And you start becoming a leader for the first time since I had been vice president for about a year. First time I felt I was a leader. And we went over the problem. It lasted maybe a week, 15 days. And after that, we gained control of the situation all around the country. We never had a spike on mortality again. We learned so much. The healthcare personnel, people from the health authorities, doctors, nurses, we learned so much. And if you look at the statistics today, if you could isolate those very harsh days in Guayaquil, you see that Ecuador did maybe one of the best managements of the pandemic after that in the whole region. And then, just before that, I had also a tough experience with change. On economic unsustainability of my country, dollarized economy, similar as what you have in Europe when you lose your monetary sovereignty. It's good because you take the hands of politicians out of control of the monetary system. So you avoid inflation, you avoid other things, but you lose monetary policy power, right? And the ways you can get solutions for your sustainability issues are very limited. Ecuador has subsidized fossil fuels for 50 years. We have spent subsidizing fossil fuels more than what we have as total debt, foreign debt included, $80 billion. When you see how Ecuador spends its fuel subsidies or where they go to, you will find out, no news for someone who knows about economics, that 75% of that money goes to the two richest quintiles of the population, right? So it's a social policy. Yes, it is, because it's supposed to control prices and inflation, and it's supposed to help the poorest. But in fact, it's a regressive social policy. It's widening the spread, increasing the difference between the rich and the poor, because you're giving more to the rich than to the poor. So yeah, you have to change it. You have to. It's your obligation. You have to change that. It's not good. It's not environmentally sustainable. It's not economically reasonable. And it's not socially desirable. So you have to change it. It's unsustainable. Here we go again with the word change and how dangerous it can be. Even when you know already what you're getting yourself into, even when history already tells you that that's a no-no because you're risking everything. You're risking a coup d'etat. So I go again on national television and tell everyone that we're making this decision after 50 years, that the money is going to solve a lot of economic issues in the country, that we're creating this fund to develop the rural sector, that is the poorest sector, that we're taking some of this money to finance free public transportation for students and all other stuff, you know. And we're trying to get the money into the pockets of those who really needs it, how it should be. And 4 days after that, I have to be evacuated from the presidential palace with a bulletproof vest on and a helmet. Through smoke, tear gas, stones, right? Good policy, very bad politics. What do you do? What do you do? One of the most important things about leading through change is being able to get out of your bubble, to look for the opposition, the people who are protesting. As much as they want to kill you, you have to go there. So again, against all advice, we managed to identify from which communities most of the protesters were coming from. These are very violent protests. This is the beginning of this riot period that started in Ecuador, went to Colombia, then to Chile. And in Chile and in Colombia, it lasted over a year. I would tell you what we did to stop it only after 2 weeks in Ecuador. Against all advice, I went into the communities. Personally, with my brave wife, who didn't want me to go alone because I was going to get killed. If she was there, of course, we're both safe, right? and you go, you lower the temperature. It's key on situations of change to manage temperature. You start listening, you get yelled at, you get threatened, and you stand there with your head up because you have done nothing wrong. You're only trying to help. You might have made a mistake, but you're here to mend. You're here to resolve. And after 2 weeks, we solved it. We managed a way to make that policy viable without the people feeling their rights are being taken from them. So change and the experiences you can have. I only have 10 minutes. I only wanted to share with you these experiences, life experiences. I think all of you now are thinking about, I know all of you now are thinking about change and how it will affect your lives, your business. It is the newest and fastest revolution I've ever seen with AI. I had written this beautiful piece with the help of ChatGPT. But only as Mariano said, that's the way I use it. I think it's like a calculator. You give it inputs and you work with it. I think it's a great tool. It doesn't have to be, we don't have to fear it. We just have to know how to use it. But I wanted to share with you these experiences about change. So thank you very much for listening. And thank you, Schiller, for having me here. It's a pleasure.